Welcome back to Tech Tuesdays here on Northwest Digital News. Seated left to right, Harry Brelsford, Kevin Hunter, and Kyle Torgeson here on the broadcast. And you know what? We have some really great news for those of you that are thinking of competing in the world of tech or actually in any business. Of course, we always target tech here, but anybody who's thinking about becoming an entrepreneur. And, you know, 1 million plus people step out to do this venture every single year, Harry, in all the different business segments that are out there. And so here's some great advice from one of the top successful business people out there. So I hope you people are paying attention. Harry, where would you like to start?
Well, I think you said it well, that, you know, this is from a forthcoming book that we'll talk about in a moment, but I wanted to extract the chapter on marketing. And while my focus is on the technology segment, really the conversation we're having today applies to any entrepreneur. And the basis of the book is, I've said it on prior shows, but it's very simple. Finder, minder, grinder, right? So finder, you got to go get the business. Minder, you got to run the business. And then grinder, you got to do the work. It's a very simple formula. So I wanted to kind of get that out up front. And then why don't we jump right into it? Today we're talking about marketing.
So let's start with the 5 Ps. And for people who wondering where the content's coming from, this is actually a new book that's coming out here shortly that Harry has written, How to Be an MSP. But it is all around entrepreneurship and how to be an entrepreneur in this business. So let's start. Let's start with the first P on there, and let's just go through the 5 that we have there.
Yeah. So again, another well-established business model. We just talked about finder, minder, grinder as pillars, and then another established paradigm is the 5 Ps of marketing. So over the next several slides, the next several minutes, we're going to talk about product. We're going to talk about distribution, but the joke in the academic community is you call it P distribution to make it to 5 Ps. Packaging, pricing, and promotion. And so think of this as almost like our little pocket MBA session today, applying to any industry. Now, again, just to be clear, MSP, managed services provider, that's a IT, that's a technology services provider. But anybody listening to today's show can benefit from this conversation. Thank you.
Well, let's move on to drilling down a little bit into product. And one of the first things that shows up at the top of this slide, riches in niches. And that is such an important thing, Harry. And so many business people fail to identify what their actual product niche or niche, however you want to say the word. They fail to identify what makes them unique and what their specific niche is. Talk about that a little bit, and why do you think so many people miss this particular lesson?
Yeah, I think they're chasing the shiny fishing lure like a silver salmon in the summertime. You know, that you see a shiny lure go by and you start chasing it when you really should be eating herring.
Yes.
and stick to the knitting. It's very tempting to do. You as an entrepreneur, at some point there's going to be no shortage of opportunities coming across your desk, right? Once you get a little further along. And your job is to say no and stick to the knitting. And so a niche, for example, one that I think is worth talking about in this day and age is the defense sector. So up here in the Pacific Northwest, we have Boeing facilities. And the defense sector is very well funded right now, right? That goes in waves, depending on, you know, the climate, if you will. But the defense sector would be interesting to an entrepreneur maybe trying to serve Boeing vendors. And, you know, Boeing has good days, Boeing has bad days, but that typically creates opportunity for an entrepreneur who's trying to fill a gap. Now, that said, make sure the niche is growing, right? So the problem with niches would be back home where I grew up in Alaska. So Alaska had arguably a several decade run with Prudhoe Bay in the oil industry. Prudhoe Bay is contracting now. That's not a lot of fun to be an entrepreneur in oil field services when, I mean, it is literally contracting. And so you always want to pick a niche that's expanding. And then something I learned early in my career when I carried the bag was you should spend no more than 50% of your time in a niche. So that means you may have two niches, which is fine. You know, a lot of people don't realize that you can have two areas of expertise, but you shouldn't spend all day, every day in your niche because, you know, you kind of need to be looking for opportunities and gaps to fill. But, you know, and it sounds like when we're rehearsing, you have some experience in this conversation you were saying with a thought leader.
Yeah, there's a number of mistakes that I see people making, you know, within this niche, and part of the reason that, or within the market rather, and failing to define their niche, failing to even understand their niche, and to take the example that you use, like in the military area, and you said that it goes in waves. Here's the really interesting thing. Let's talk about even housing for a moment, because to the everyday person that's out there, they're very much aware of the fact that, you know, the housing market is changing from a buyer's market to a seller's market all the time. And then you think about builders. So let's take somebody who is a general contractor, and they're going, okay, so when are they having their heyday? They're having their heyday when it is a seller's market, because the more homes, more new homes are generally, not always the case, but are generally more needed during a seller's market. And so they should be predictably writing a higher niche there, or a rise on the market per se. But here's the interesting thing. Even when the housing market is expanding and when it's shrinking, both, there's always contractors that are growing during those upswings and growing during those downswings. And you go, how did somebody figure out how to grow while the market was going down? And it was by not only understanding their niche, but even drilling a little bit further into the niche. So if you took the military example, there are times when the military budget is expanding and there are times when it's extracting. But if you dig far enough into it, you can ask yourself these questions. What part of the military budget is always constant?
Yeah, exactly. And that's where you're rewarded for your business intelligence, as they say.
Yeah, you gotta look a little deeper than just the surface. And when you do, those smart people are growing in their niches, no matter what the market is doing.
Yep. Let's talk work types.
Yes.
So in my industry of technology, as a service with a recurring revenue model is the rage. And the simple example for the listeners today is your mobile phone bill. Your mobile phone bill is paid monthly. And now they even amortize the cost of your mobile phone. You don't really, rare is the day you actually write a $800 check for your phone, but rather you pay an additional $24 a month. And that's a very predictable revenue stream. It's quite a nice model, especially if you're going to be acquired and you can demonstrate to the buyer that, you know, we have this predictable revenue. A lot of us have spent time, and myself included, in the billable hour market. In our industry, it's called break fix. It's okay, but you know, you're kind of always having to recreate your business. And in technology, you only really get work opportunities when things break. That's a little bit negative. And then finally, project work. And back to your point, I like the construction example. Let me extend that to architects. Architects, as far as I can tell, are like corks, and they do project work. And a cork goes up with the incoming tide, and it goes down with the outgoing tide. And that's why you'll see agencies and architects, when times are good, they're very good, and when times are bad, they're bad. But that's kind of what they do, right? They're an example to be the tunnel that was recently completed underneath downtown Seattle. Great work for probably a decade for architects, but now those architects really have to take a look at, unfortunately, probably staff reductions. Project's over, you know.
Yep.
And then there's a conversation not unrelated to niches called work styles, as to whether you're a generalist or a specialist. So again, you could have a niche in the defense sector. That's a niche, and maybe you carved out, to your point, maybe something inside of there. But you could still be a generalist that maybe is kind of a jack of all trades, and I don't like that. I tend to prefer specialist. That's what I've done in my career. Is I like, by analogy, I like doctors that are specialized. When I go see the doc, I can appreciate someone that's specialized and they know what the heck they're doing.
Yes. Yes.
I
just, before we move off of the service selections, work types, and work styles, I just want to pick up one thing that comes out of the work types, and that's where you're talking about recurring type business. And having visited with a lot of exit planners from around the United States, one of the things that when they look at valuation of business, so whenever you're starting a business, you always have to think of this as an asset that you're creating for yourself. And you're going to exit the business at some point down the road. It's either feet first, or you're going to sell it, or whatever is going to happen. But you're going to exit the business at some point. And having a business that has recurring type billing and recurring type business that the same customers are doing business with you on a regular basis, this also affects the valuation of your organization down the road. And a company that has recurring services, recurring billing, will tend to sell for more than a company that has to scrape up their next customer every single time they've done business with somebody. So just something to consider there.
Well, Kevin, last example on that is Adobe. So I recently had an important need to buy the full Adobe Acrobat. You know how there's the free reader that maybe does 3 things? But when you're a publisher, there's a need for the full Adobe Acrobat, right? There just is. And so I had to pop up on Adobe, and I looked at my account, and in 2005, 2007, I bought Adobe Acrobat for $100. Now it is anywhere from $1.99 a month to $15 a month. Adobe has pivoted from the box to recurring revenue, and God bless them, man. That's a hard pivot, and they did it.
Yes, very much so. Well, let's visit about the second P, distribution, and geography and demand. Let's start with geography first.
Yeah, I mean, you have to decide, do you serve a local market, or do you have national or global reach? And what we're seeing with, again, in my field of managed services providers, IT pros, with remote tools, they can now serve customers in faraway locations and bring their particular expertise and customer service. It used to be near, Kevin. You'll recall it. Maybe in your hometown they still have the computer shop, and you drive over to the computer shop with the broken laptop.
Exactly.
There's a time and a place for that, but that would be local. Versus, I believe, the gentleman that we've had on this show before, who is an MSP, a friend of yours, he is serving, I believe, Phoenix and Southwest Washington. So he's serving a couple of geographies.
That's correct. And I'm aware of many clients that they have even throughout the Midwest and other areas. So yeah, there is a definite reach because of how that business model has really moved over the last number of years. Yeah, the tools are great. And then closely related is, are you in a rural or urban area? That is, again, I live in a rural area, but I'm a ferry ride away from an urban area called Seattle. I'm probably doing a little bit of both. But I prefer rural. is a lifestyle. I sleep better. The only disadvantage is sometimes that rural can present for you is because, likewise, I'm also in a rural area. But sometimes the tools of technology aren't that great there. So, part of the reason our broadcast studio is where it is so that we have access to the necessary internet and the speeds that we need. Where I'm at out in the country, it'd be lovely to do a broadcast like this directly from home. But I'm not sure what century they installed that internet out there, but it is very, very slow. So I don't have any choice but to do my broadcast from a more urban area. So anyway.
Yeah. Macro and micro. So really, what I want to talk about here are the macro economy, national, global, micro, the firm, the individual firm. A lot of people understand that concept, but what I really want to talk about is maybe looking at counter-cyclical products, and I will give you an example. And again, an entrepreneur needs to be thinking this way, but right now, because the Alaskan economy is contracting with the sad demise of Prudhoe Bay, it's a natural resource-based economy. There are two counter-cyclical elements, and the first one is moving companies. So moving companies are doing very well because there's just a reality that people are leaving Alaska. It's not right, it's not wrong, it's just a reality. And so moving companies, that's actually a really lucrative niche, right? And so you can go counter-cyclical. And another one historically is education. And what that is that people tend to go back to school when the economy is bad. And so that's where you'll see for-profit colleges do better. State colleges they're typically stable, and they have a totally different business model. But the for-profit colleges that maybe are teaching people to get certified on a technology, they tend to do well in a declining economy because it's like, well, I got to go get certified. And Kevin, when the economy is good, you're competing for time, because if you're an IT pro and you're making bank in a booming economy, you might scratch your head and go, now, why am I paying thousands of dollars and giving up Tuesday and Thursday nights to go get certified when I'm doing great today? So I shout out to counter-cyclical strat. Cyclical is very clear. Counter-cyclical is what the entrepreneur needs to think about to diversify their risk.
Absolutely. And you know what, when I think even back to, I don't know if you remember when W. Edwards Deming came back. He was an American scientist that we sent to Japan, came back here, and he launched these show series, If Japan Can, Why Can't We? What Japan was doing was that counter-cyclical understanding of their, with applications to their training, all of that sort of thing. They were investing money at times when here in the West, we wouldn't put a penny into it because you go either can't afford to, or, et cetera, et cetera. We're too busy chasing, the next customer to even think about, investing in our training or education. And yet in the Japanese culture, they were doing quite the opposite. And I'll tell you what, when those booms came along, wow, were they prepared. And meanwhile, we were scrambling to go, oh, we need to get training for this. A little too late.
I know. Yeah.
Missed the opportunity.
Yes, sir.
All right, let's talk about packaging.
Yeah. So a couple of ideas for a service provider, entrepreneur. Do you want to have a one-to-one relationship? So that would be an example of an accountant. You have an accountant and you have a client. And that's what I would call one-to-one. That's very common with computer technology professionals, right? I go to your studio, I help you with your electronics, I make sure you're up and running. That's one-to-one. It's a good life. It's the life of accountants and lawyers and service providers. It's not the life of being a billionaire because there's limits. I later on in the book, I talk about realistically, you can maybe build 1,200 hours a year out of 2,400 hours in a year because of, you got to do sales and marketing, vacation days, all that. So you can bill about 1,200. There are limits.
Yep.
So hopefully you're billing at $100 an hour for the simple math. But that's one-to-one. It's a good living, and a lot of people are really comfortable with it. It's arguably a six-figure life in a professional capacity, but it's not a what's $1 billion? Is that about 12 figures? I mean, that's a big number.
Yes. Yes.
It's not to that. So the leverage is going to come one to many. And what a lot of people don't think about, and this is just a very specific example, is training. So in technology, if you can go to a client site or bring in multiple clients and train them and charge them X for the day, so maybe $495 for some really solid training, and you can pack the room, that's one to many, right? Now we're talking leverage. And another little hidden jewel is sometimes you may even take it a step higher and train the trainers. So what if you decided, well, I want to get trainers in and train them so then they can go forth and multiply. You know, I know it's probably not the best example of modern times, but you're starting to almost build multi-level marketing when you start thinking of train the trainer, right?
Yep.
That how can I expand? And then dress for success. So this is a funny one that in the book I talk about. Sort of in the Pacific Northwest, we got the REI look. Okay, we have a particular look. Austin, Texas has the man bun. Kevin, funny story. One of my readers, a gentleman who runs a successful technology consulting practice in Providence, Rhode Island, his wife is a fashion consultant, and she, being from the East Coast, they arguably will still wear a suit jacket, maybe even a tie. and she's put herself in that line of work to help computer guys, for lack of a better word, dress for success. And she's carved out a little practice about grooming, shopping for fashions, and so on. And the punchline out of all this is she still kind of cringes when she sees West Coast technology professionals, because West Coast technology people in the Bay Area and Seattle, let's just say we kind of march to the beat of a different drummer when it comes to fashion compared to New York City.
No doubt.
But
go ahead.
Or go ahead. Well, no, don't underestimate, though, your attire. Go ahead, Kevin.
I was just going to share with you a funny dress for success story that's actually outside the area of technology. But years ago, I was working for Guardian Industries, a multi-billion-dollar company, and we were having a big corporate picture that was being taken. So 36 different facilities, all the plant managers from around the United States flew in to meet Bill Davidson, who's the company CEO, and have a big corporate picture taken with him. And in walks Bill, very relaxed looking, no tie, I'll just, when you talk about marching to the beat of a different drummer, well, here's all of his staff sitting there in their shirts and ties and their suit jackets and everything else, and somebody mentions or asks Mr. Davidson, are you planning on putting on a suit jacket or a tie for this picture? And Bill says, ties cut off the blood circulation to your brain. You should have seen the ties disappear in that room in a really big hurry. It was quite funny. So it all depends upon what your audience is, and I remember back in the day when you mentioned that how people dress over in New York in the area of tech and other fields, and how they might be in this very so-called professional dress. My opinion of what professional dress is what your peers in your industry and your locale are doing, and you should imitate whatever that is.
Well, and Kevin, I'll add to that. In 2014, I did a 30-country tour for Microsoft. It's quite a busy year on Windows and Office 365, and I had to wear a suit and tie. And to be honest, it's not that bad. I got used to it. But in Asia, it was mandatory. In Europe, it was mandatory. In Latin America, it was mandatory. I'm sure you've seen, but Latin American professionals from Brazil and other countries, they dress very, very well. And I got to tell you, because in my industry, there's computer developers and coders who are like, well, I'm not going to take the job because they said I have to wear a tie. And Kevin, I kind of got over it after about 2 days. Now the good news is I got some shirts and suits that fit. That makes a heck of a difference.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does.
All right, my friend.
All right, let's move on to pricing and the 5 elements of pricing.
And again, everything helps everything. So, some of this is repetitious from prior slides, but Kevin, that's by design. It's an ecosystem marketing, right? And so let's revisit this. First of all, I have a theory about never saying no. So if you came and said, Harry, I have no money, I'd say no problem. Do you have a boat? Can I do barter? I've kind of wanted a boat. You live down on a river and coastline, Kevin. Let's talk about that boat of yours,
Mm-hmm.
and I'll do the work. So never say no initially, and get creative as an entrepreneur, right? Maybe Kevin,
Mm-hmm.
from your world with car dealers, I don't know if they're allowed to do this, but maybe a technology professional could literally have a conversation about trading services for a used car. I
Most
don't know if
definitely.
that goes on. Okay.
Most definitely. Yeah. There's no business that's insulated from that, and people should always be thinking about trade of services. Happens all the time.
Yeah. Uh, Pricing is local.
Mm-hmm.
What one makes in New York, because New York is expensive. Let's just pretend someone with a niche in a law, Michael Klein in New York with a niche with law firms. I'm going to pick a number, maybe $200 an hour as an
Mm-hmm.
IT professional. Someone in, a rural territory in the Midwest, maybe $50 an hour for the same work. With all due respect, it's all
Mm-hmm.
relative to the cost of living, and so you want to do a competitive survey in your field, in your area. This is where meetups are great, user groups are great, just asking questions. We talked about monthly recurring revenue is the hot model, probably the preferred model, but pricing can also be time and materials, what we previously called billable hours,
Mm-hmm.
and then fixed price bidding for project work. And uh, again, hopefully this is straightforward, but and Kevin, to be honest, it's usually a mix of the three.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you will never find someone that has a 100% recurring revenue model as a service provider like a computer guy, because I've got that old timey client. He's getting on in years. He's got a home office. I just bill him by the hour when I visit.
Mm-hmm.
Right? There's always going to be that.
Here's something that I want to share even for our existing entrepreneurs out there, because when you talk about pricing, it's quite often a tripping point for many business people, because they think that the primary driver behind a business decision is price of goods and services. And so here's something to be aware of. The number 2 there says competitive surveys in your field. So yes, your pricing does need to be based on what's local, but actually do that work, because many businesses have no clue whatsoever how their pricing compares to competitors. And I'll give you a real life example of somebody who is sitting just under $90 an hour in their billing, and after doing a competitive survey, they find out the going rate is actually 135 in their area. But there's still this reluctance to change the pricing. If I change the pricing, man, I'm going to lose a whole bunch of my clients. And so they're still scared. And here's the thing that a business person should know. If you increase your prices by 10% across the board, you have to lose 25% of your clients before you break even. And I'm going, what a great trade that is. I could actually clear up 25% of my calendar in terms of time, which is your most important asset, and still be in the same money position. Yes. So by golly, make it happen today. And in the particular example that I'm talking about, where the business actually did adjust from 95 to 135, which is a lot more than 10%. Several hundred clients involved, one company dropped.
Yeah. And Kevin, you know what? I'll make a note. We need to get our friend Carl Palachuk back on, because he has done a lot of research in this area. You'll remember Carl has really keyed in on standard operating procedures. So Carl P., I'm making a note. All right, well, let's move on. I think the next slide's promotion.
Yes, it is.
Let's talk promotion. This is a natural act for myself. I'm assuming for yourself as well. I enjoy the promotion function. And so something a lot of people underestimate that I take very seriously is press and analyst relations. And so with this new book coming out, for example, I have been reaching out to some analysts I know and respect. Are they the customer for the book? Absolutely not. But analysts talk to a lot of people, and they also have a lot of wisdom. And so I have tried to help firms in the past that did not see the value in press releases and press and analyst relations. And, they just couldn't understand, how am I going to ring the bell at 5 p.m. today with buying some, thought leader a lunch. And, Kevin, it just adds up. And then a shout out to this show, Northwest Digital News, and other venues. There are a lot of media outlets looking for interesting local stories. And
absolutely.
Maybe you want to speak to that, but you've been a good citizen about incorporating people who want to tell their story. Thank you.
Yeah, and because when you think about this, Harry, in what venue are we publishing this information? It's on the internet. It's online media. And when you think of all the reasons that all the people go to visit the web every day, it's to get informed, it's to get educated, it's to find information. It's all of those things. And of course, people also visit the internet for entertainment purposes. And so if you think about that, get online, find media outlets like ours, Northwest Digital News. And for anybody out there who has a great story you want to share, you absolutely should get in contact with us, because that's a business, and that's what we like to do. And because I recognize these are the reasons people visit the internet to begin with, we put a lot of time and effort into educating and informing our public.
And it just made me think, Kevin, nearly every small community has that weekly paper, right? That comes out on Saturdays. And it's, quite frankly, it's typically real estate ads. Like Windermere's got the back cover. But there is local news, and these publications are hungry for your press release, which is one of my lower points on writing, and writing an article, a guest column. I would encourage you to think about speaking opportunities at the community center. I'll tell you, if you want to kind of get started on this, who is accessible and open venue for you would be retirement homes where you have active adults. Now, they may not be your customer, but you got to kind of get a resume going. You need to kind of get up in front. You got to get your mojo going on a PowerPoint deck and a speech. But retirement homes, Kevin, that's actually one of the biggest revenue sources for universities like the University of Denver, where I went, because people, retired people want to take a class in, trauma. I don't know. But colleges have found out that is an excellent source of continuing education revenue. So you heard it here first. Now, mechanics. I spend a lot of time in the book on this, that in the computer field, we tend to be a little introverted. This is a whole Myers-Briggs personality type conversation, but tend to be a little introverted. And so I'm just asking for base hits. I'm asking you to go out and give away 12 business cards per quarter and receive 12 business cards per quarter. I'm not asking for, a trade show booth where you collect 300 cards that you can't possibly follow up on in a few days. And the way that you do this is you attend 12 marketing events per quarter. So this is where I really like the service organizations like the Chamber of Commerce, maybe even the Rotary, the meetups that are now, very prolific. But I'm just asking you, again, let's, for the sake of argument, a quarter is 12 weeks. It's actually, I think, 13.5, but go ahead and take a week off. But once a week, you should be doing something, man. If you're an entrepreneur.
Great advice, all great advice on the 5 Ps of becoming an entrepreneur, and specifically in the areas of tech. One thing I want to mention, and then I'll give you the floor to kind of wrap this up here on this book that's coming out. But one thing I noticed above the title of the book 90-day MSP Business Fast Track. There's a really interesting thing in some of the best and sharpest business minds that I've run into across the country. They're always talking about the 90 days. And the interesting part is if you take all these things into consideration and rock and roll this thing for 90 days, well, then what you need to do is sit down at the end of 90 days, hit the reset button. What did we do right? What did we do wrong? What can we do better to fix our mistakes? And then rock on with your next 90 days. But remember to hit that reset button every 90 days in your business venture. And you'll be surprised by how great your 6 months and your 9 months and your year and those long-term goals turn out when you actually do sit down and take a look at where you're at every 90 days in whatever business you might be in.
Yeah, I mean, think about it. We're just starting the second quarter of 2019. Now, quite frankly, I felt the first quarter went pretty quick. Mm-hmm. A quarter is essentially 90 days. And
that's right.
And so I'd like to think in terms of quarterly behavior, 90 days. The other thing is I have found that, and maybe that's where an entrepreneur and some listening can help fill a gap in business owners' lives, is a lot of business owners are overwhelmed. And so they understand the importance of being strategic, but they sometimes need a guide by the side during that 90-day period to do so. And then finally, with the 90 days, I guess I'm saying that, yes, I laid it out. Think of it this way, that when you think in terms of 90-day chunks as an author, this can also be adopted into the academic community, right? And that's one of the hottest areas is now colleges have a major in entrepreneurship. And so, this would be a semester book, or it could be a quarter book, but they might have to cut a couple chapters out or do a combo, to make it fit in a quarter academically. But it would certainly be an excellent book for a semester with some additional reading.
No doubt.
And so that's part of my, they call it instructional design when you're laying out the book. But that's how I'm thinking, is what other markets can this book serve? And maybe that was the point of today's show in terms of being an entrepreneur.
No doubt. Take a moment and let everybody know when the book is expected to hit market and where people will find it.
Yeah, so it's very simple. The book should be available mid-April. We're coming in for a landing right now, but Kevin, what that means is just last night we had to correct about 6 little teeny mistakes in the manuscript. The comma was out of place, the little isms. It's 476 pages, and I'm comfortable saying that it will be released mid-April to the public. And it's very simple. Just keep your eye on smbnation.com, my company. And I appreciate people considering the book. I'm always the first to say this in no way should be the only book you buy. I'm saying it should be the next book you buy. We talked about book reviews previously, and I still stand by you should be a life learner. Yes.
And as I shared with people before, even people who say they're not a prolific reader, if you make a commitment to read for 20 minutes a day, you'll read 3 books a year, and it will absolutely change your life if you do. Well, thanks, Harry, for all the great information, and of course, send us the press release as well when How to Be an MSP is available on the market, because of course we'll release that here on Northwest Digital News as well. Thanks to everybody who joined us here on the broadcast. Harry Brelsford, Kevin Hunter, and Kyle Torgerson on Tech Tuesdays. Take care.
This concludes today's live programming on Northwest Digital News. Thanks for joining us for this special broadcast. Heard around the world in more than 70 countries on YouTube, Instagram, Patreon, Facebook, and Twitch TV. If you enjoyed a story or guest we had here on Northwest Digital News and would like to strut your stuff on the broadcast, email us today at wainfo2017@gmail.com or call or text to 360-545-3501. We're always interested in unique stories, topics, and guests to share with our worldwide audience. Before you go, don't forget to give us a big thumbs up and comment on the live stream. And for those of you who'd like to financially support the broadcast, you can do so at patreon.com/Northwest Digital News. We thank you for your patronage. On behalf of Chris Bornstead, Kyle Torgeson, Stephanie Hunter, and all the people that made this broadcast possible, I'm Kevin Hunter. Till next time, take care.